Hey everyone, Andreas Antonopoulos here. Our August live stream Q&A starts in 5 minutes. 5 minutes until we go live on screen. In the meantime, you can play around with the questions and go and vote, comment, or ask your own question by using the Slido code you're going to see on your screen in just a few seconds. 5 more minutes. All we have to finish is hair, makeup, and special effects. And, you know, hair is going to be hard. So let's do this. 5 minutes. I'll be right with you. Hey everyone, welcome to the August Livestream Q&A. This is Andreas Antonopoulos. I'll be answering all of the great questions you've been putting on the Slido for this special August Livestream session. Now, we're not covering a specific topic today, so it's a free-for-all. Bitcoin, open blockchain, anything you want to ask it on the Slido. And if you are a patron, you've actually had access to this for more than a week. If you're a YouTube member, you've had access to it for the last hour. And those of you who just joined, you can see the Slido code on the banner that was up just a few seconds ago and use that. Now, keep in mind, this isn't a sponsored event. I'm not endorsing any products or companies. This is open, free, ad-free, and public, thanks to the support of all of the people who are monthly subscribers, either on Patreon or on YouTube, and make it possible for me and my team to produce quality educational content about Bitcoin and open blockchains for as many people as possible in as many languages as possible with a neutral, unbiased perspective. And that means that you are the sponsors. And so for that, I would like to briefly thank all of the people who make it possible to do this work, and I'm going to take your attention right now for a couple of minutes and show you why and thank the people who do this. Hang with me here. All right, this time it's in reverse alphabetic order, and I'm not going to be able to read all of these names. So thank you to all of the patrons who have made it possible for me to do this show and to do all of the other work I do, which is given away for free and is part of my effort to educate people around the world about this technology. Thank you to all 55 members of my monthly subscriber community on Patreon and YouTube who make it possible. You are the bee's knees, as we say in England. You've probably never heard that expression before, but it means a good thing. 170 of you watching right now, and here's another message from the very people who make it possible.
I am a patron of Andreas because I came across his videos online, and that's how I learned about Bitcoin. So that's how I got introduced to Bitcoin.
I'm out tonight at a social event organised by Andreas as part of his Patreon support. We just had a few drinks in a pub, which is a Punch Tavern, downtown London. So it's been a really fun evening to meet a lot of like-minded people.
We should support the work Andreas is doing. He's doing so much in getting new people into Bitcoin and into Bitcoin education.
He's a great teacher. He can explain very complex topics in an easy to understand way. He's very honest, very precise, technically prepared, and intellectually honest. I think is his best characteristic.
Brings such clarity to really complex subjects, which is Bitcoin, and the industry around it.
It has been a very, very good inspiration for me, and every Bitcoin I'm giving to him, it will be very well used in helping others understand Bitcoin, and I think it will improve the world at some point.
Being a patron, I get to meet Andreas, and that's why I love being a patron. I'm going to continue being a patron.
I think it's just a good thing. If you're interested in learning new things and also want to support the Bitcoin community, then you got to be a patron.
Being a Patreon makes you feel special. You can attend to his live Q&A sessions. You can meet him at happy hours. It's really great, totally worth it. I'm very, very enthusiastic of being a Patreon.
I'd like him to be able to produce his great and valuable content in the future, free from advertising, and just with the help of his patrons, and that's why I'm supporting him on Patreon.
Oh my God, can we get to the questions already? What is it with all of this advertising? I get it. You need money to produce this work and you're asking for support from people, but like really, can we get to the questions already? Yes, we can get to the questions right now. Thank you for your patience with that. And of course, thank you from my entire team. It actually takes quite a lot of people to produce all of this work. So let's get to our first question of the day. Oop. Well, that's not good. I had a bit of a problem there. Give me a second. Ooh, that's not good at all. That is the wrong window. Don't you hate it when a plugin decides to pop up a tab and hijack your video session? Let me try that one again. That's better. That's better. Now the question is actually on screen. Unfortunately, I now have to fire our video producer for that horrible mistake. Wait, no, I'm the video producer, so I cannot fire myself. Oh well. Let's get to it. Becker asks, can you explain the difference between replace by fee and child pays for parent? What are the use cases? Becker, this is a great question. Replace by fee, or RBF, and child pays for parent, or CPFP, are two mechanisms used to bump the fee of a transaction in Bitcoin when that transaction has, due to a demand for blockchain space, become stuck. Effectively, it's not getting mined into a block. You've made a transaction, but it's not getting mined into a block because it doesn't have sufficient fee. So what do? Well, there are two ways to bump the fee. One requires some proactive activity. The other one can be done in a more flexible way. Replace by fee is a flag that is set in your transaction when you send it that tells everybody this transaction may get replaced by another transaction that has a higher fee. Now, what that means is that this transaction is even less trustworthy under zero confirmation conditions. Not really, because you can do that by double spending a transaction anyway. What it means is primarily that the transaction ID may change. So if more fee is added to a replace by fee transaction, one of the most obvious things that happens is the transaction ID changes. And so if you're looking at that transaction in a block explorer, you might see it marked as double spent. And that's because, hopefully, the sender replaced it with a transaction paying higher fee. Let me break this down for you. RBF is something the sender of a transaction does and says, this transaction is currently paying a fee, but in the future, I want to have the option to increase that fee if my transaction is not confirmed in the time frame I want. Now, in my wallets, all transactions I make are RBF, meaning that every transaction I make with one of my wallets has the RBF flag on it, and it's basically saying, I'm trying to be a cheap ass here. I'm going to go in with the lowest fee I think will make it. And if I find out in an hour or 2 hours or 3 hours that it's still not confirmed, or if it gets to a point where I really need it to be confirmed a bit more urgently, I'm going to come back and I'm going to bump this fee up so that I can get it confirmed. But I'm not going to overpay in advance because I'm a cheap ass. So 1 Satoshi per byte is all you get. All of my transactions, RBF on, 1 Satoshi per byte. And then just hope for the best. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Child pays for parent is interesting because it's a slightly different formulation and has different characteristics. Child pays for parent is something the recipient or the sender can do to get a stuck transaction confirmed, mined into the next block. Now, where RBF can only be done by the sender, child pays for parent can be done by the sender or the recipient, or under some circumstances with anchor payments by any third party. And we'll talk a bit about that in a second. All right, so what does child pay for parent do? It takes advantage of a mining policy where transactions are not considered in isolation, but they are considered as packages, especially when there is a parent transaction and one of its outputs is being spent by a child transaction, and both of those transactions have yet to be confirmed. They're sitting in the mempool. So when you look at transactions in the mempool, they might just be isolated transactions, or they might be chains of transactions where you have one transaction, some of its change is then spent, or some of its outputs are being spent by another transaction and another transaction and another transaction in a chain. And this chain needs to be confirmed altogether. You can't confirm one of the children until the parents have been confirmed. They're all waiting in the mempool. Now, the interesting thing here is that from the miner's perspective, what matters is not the fees in any one of those transactions in the package, but the overall level of fees across the entire package. So if by confirming all of them, you can get a higher level of fee per byte when aggregated together, that's an appealing proposition to miners. All they care about is the fundamental metric of fee per byte. So that means if you put a parent transaction, if you put a transaction into the mempool and it's not being confirmed, what you can do is you can purposely create a child transaction in order to add fee by making the child overpay so that it carries along the parent by increasing the average fee across the two. So let's say your parent pays 1 Satoshi per byte and your child pays, let's say, 3 Satoshi per byte, and they're the same size, then effectively the sum is 4 Satoshi and divide by 2, or something like that. I probably got the math wrong. But the bottom line is the average Satoshi per byte between the two is what matters. And so, yeah, and in fact, that would be 2 Satoshi per V byte across the two. Now, the interesting use case here is that this is something the recipient can do or the sender can do. Let's say I pay my friend Bob and pay them with a simple normal transaction. Usually most transactions have 1 input, 2 outputs. So I've spent one of my inputs, I've made a payment to Bob, that's Bob's output. And then there's another output, which let's call it Andreas's change, which is my change output. Now, by creating a child that spends Bob's output, Bob can create that child to bump the fee of the transaction I sent to Bob that hasn't been confirmed and get both of those confirmed faster. So Bob can execute child pays for parent because Bob has an output that they can use to create a child transaction. But I can also use child pays for parent because the change that's coming back to me is also an output that I can spend to create a child transaction that pays more fee and therefore bump the original transaction, even if that original transaction did not use RBF. I hope this is not too confusing. RBF, sender only, signaling in advance that we may replace the transaction with a transaction with more fee. Child pays for parent, taking advantage of the fact that transactions are considered as packages. And if there is a parent, a child, a grandchild, a great-grandchild, etc., the average fee across all of them is taken into consideration. So if you purposely create a child transaction, a descendant transaction with a higher fee, it increases the parent's opportunity to get confirmed as well. And that's why the child is effectively paying for the parent. There is a very interesting use case of this in the Lightning Network where you can create within a commitment transaction a payment output that is dust, meaning that it's not a significant amount of Satoshis, but can be used as an input to make a child that bumps up the fee for the parent. And that means that you don't have to overpay commitment transaction fees in advance to ensure that you can resolve protocol disputes and penalties, but you can actually allow either party in a Lightning payment channel to bump the commitment transaction by creating a child off one of the dust outputs, which is one of the anyone can spend. It's an interesting concept. I believe those are called anchor payments. It's a new proposal that's being implemented as part of the Lightning protocol. So maybe we went too technical on that, but it leads nicely into the next question. Sujay asks, what are some of the biggest challenges for Lightning Network right now, and how can those challenges be tackled? All right, Sujay, I'll be very, very clear. I think the absolute biggest challenge for Lightning Network right now is the difficulty onboarding onto the Lightning Network. Right now, if you have to make a transaction to fund a channel, every time you want to move some Bitcoin into a Lightning wallet, that makes it very difficult to onboard a lot of users. And one of the ways this can be resolved is by having exchanges allow withdrawals and deposits directly into Lightning channels. This would make a huge difference because an exchange can maintain a number of well-funded channels, and therefore it can create inbound liquidity for its clients, which is one of the challenges with the Lightning Network. How do you get inbound capacity on your channels? And so this is one of the difficulties. Right now, exchanges don't have the financial motivation to really adopt some of the latest technologies, even technologies that are now 2.5, 3 years old, like SegWit, because it's much more profitable to list a whole bunch of questionable ethics coins and other things that really push the gambling and greed of their customers, because they make money on that. So if they list the latest crappy scam coin, they get paid a lot more than if they make SegWit transactions, batching, support some of the latest features, RBF, CPFP, fee management, things like that, or even the Lightning Network, in order to improve the experience of Bitcoin for their users. So I think that's one of the biggest problems. There are currently only a handful of exchanges that allow you to do withdrawals to Lightning, and even those exchanges really don't allow for some obvious and very useful types of user experiences. My co-author Rene Picard was telling me the other day that one of the things he wanted to implement was the ultimate Lightning dollar cost averaging plugin. And basically what this was a plugin that connects to an exchange and using the API buys 1 cent worth of Bitcoin every minute and immediately sends it over Lightning to a wallet. So this is a true application of streaming money as an on-ramp from fiat. And it only makes sense if you support Lightning. And so far it hasn't proven to be possible, and not because of limitations in Lightning, but because of the business model of exchanges. So, you know, if you're running an exchange, think about this very carefully. Supporting Lightning is a game changer, in my opinion. And I think the first exchanges that really wholeheartedly support this and really support the use cases for Lightning will benefit greatly from this. Stop being timid. Put Lightning in your exchange, withdrawals and deposits. It would allow us to maintain a circular economy where we don't need to close channels in order to move liquidity back on-chain, and instead we could both earn and spend on the Lightning Network and keep the capacity in the channels all the time, which really takes Bitcoin to the next level. All right, are we having fun so far? Are people jumping up and down and doing silly things in the chat room? Has there been an emoji storm yet? Don't make me ask for it. All right. Let's see, 287 people currently online. Welcome all. Thank you so much for joining. If you want to ask a question, don't forget to use our Slido. I'll put the Slido code up in just a second. But keep in mind, we already have quite a lot of questions, and they're good questions. So if you see one that's close enough to what you want to ask, vote that one up. Don't split the votes by creating another slightly different variation of that question and then ruining the chances of getting your question answered. And let's see what we've got next. Anonymous asks, Is Monero a shitcoin or a viable privacy-focused alternative to Bitcoin? Monero is a viable privacy-focused alternative to Bitcoin. You know, the disagreement I have with you there is not the word shitcoin. Absolutely not, in my opinion, a shitcoin. There is tremendous technical merit to Monero. It's a fascinating system, and I think it's very strong in its own merit. The real objection I have is the word alternative. I don't think it's an alternative. I think it's a complement to Bitcoin. So Monero is neither a shitcoin nor a alternative to Bitcoin, but it is a viable privacy complement to Bitcoin. And I think that's actually one of the best ways to use it. So as you probably have figured out by now, I'm not a maximalist. And when you ask me questions like, should I do A or B? My answer is almost always both. Becker asks, 1 sat is the smallest unit on chain. Is it really possible to add more decimal places without any hard fork? How? And wouldn't that create incompatibility? As far as I know, so far, I have not seen any mechanism to add more decimal places, to basically create units smaller than a Satoshi without a hard fork. But that doesn't mean it's not possible. That just means we haven't yet figured out how to do it. And there are lots of things that I thought were not possible without a hard fork that then, surprisingly, we found a way to do with a soft fork. SegWit being a great example of that. But some of the other proposals I've seen also very good examples of that. So is it possible to add more decimal places without a hard fork? Maybe. The better answer is we already have smaller units than a Satoshi, and we have them on the network where it makes sense to have smaller units than a Satoshi, and that's the Lightning Network. The Lightning Network base unit is not a Satoshi, it's a millisatoshi. And a millisatoshi is 1,000th of a Satoshi. Which for those of you who are not familiar is from the metric system and the prefix milli, which means 1,000, which is approximately 2 pound-feet ounce 16ths of a Satoshi if you're using the imperial system and have not yet elected to reject that system. So 1 millisatoshi is the unit used on the Lightning Network. And it allows you to do the kinds of microtransactions, or you might even call these nanotransactions. And since it is a billionth, right? And nanotransactions on the Lightning Network make sense. Now, would you actually need to do sub-Satoshi units on Bitcoin? Given how the fees would work, that's kind of a double-edged sword, because it's very likely that fees are going to be 1 Satoshi or above for the long foreseeable future. So therefore, it doesn't really make a sense to do a sub-Satoshi transaction. It doesn't even make sense to do a sub-10,000 Satoshi transaction or even 100,000 Satoshi transaction on-chain at the moment. That's what the Lightning Network is for, and it already has smaller units. So this may be a moot question, meaning that we may never need to further divide the on-chain unit because we can more easily divide the off-chain unit where it makes sense to do microtransactions. Our next question comes from Rodney. Hey Rodney, good to hear from you. Seeing the recent Fidelity announcement, what does this mean for Bitcoin? What does this mean for the average nocoiner? I haven't really paid much attention, but Fidelity is a monster large financial institution, And so the fact that they are planning a Bitcoin fund, which is what I understand they're doing, is interesting. And it's not interesting for Bitcoin. It's interesting for Fidelity's customers and other people who have access to exchange-traded funds. This doesn't change the fundamental nature of Bitcoin as a system that really can serve the other 6 billion, the underbanked and unbanked, because they don't have Fidelity accounts. But what it does is it bridges the gap between those who want exposure to a uncorrelated or counter-correlated asset like Bitcoin at a time when fiat is trying out some pretty bizarre experiments with inflation, supply, stimulus, and debt. And they may want to choose another asset, but lack either the technical expertise or access to the technical expertise to do so with a self-custody solution. Now, not everybody can self-custody Bitcoin, especially at the levels we're talking about when you're looking at an investor. So whether this is for institutional investors or it's for retail investors, a lot of people want some exposure to this asset without having to jump through all of the technological hoops to do self-custody. They will not be first-class citizens of Bitcoin. They will be third-class, fourth-class citizens of Bitcoin. If you don't control your keys, you don't control your coins. If you don't run a node, you don't participate in consensus. So compared to people who have their own keys, run their own nodes, and maybe participate in mining, who I would consider first-class citizens of Bitcoin, these Fidelity customers will be fourth-class citizens of Bitcoin. But guess what? They're already one step towards their exit from complete reliance on fiat. And that's a good thing. We should celebrate that. More people being able to participate in the system, even if it's just for the monetary characteristics, even if it's just exposure to the monetary characteristics without actual ownership of the cryptocurrency. There are some things that I would say make me concerned about this. And the concern I've expressed before for these kinds of traded funds or other institutional style investors is that this concentrates ownership and therefore control and therefore participation in consensus and governance in these entities. So when it comes to doing a hard fork in order to increase privacy in Bitcoin, or the opposite, when they decide they want to do a hard fork in order to implement KYC AML to cripple the open decentralized aspects of Bitcoin, how much of a vote do billions of dollars under their control in Bitcoin, how much of a vote does that give them? That's a risky thing, and we need to be very, very careful about that aspect of it. All right, I don't know if this is actually Peter. We were having this conversation on Twitter earlier. Peter asks, what is an xpub? So a pub is an establishment where you can drink. And when pandemic happens, they shut them all down, and that's how you get an xpub. Okay, more seriously, what is an xpub? An xpub is, as the name implies, an extended public key. An extended public key or extendable public key is a public key that can produce more public keys. The other part of this is what's known as an xpriv, which is an extendable private key which can produce more private keys. So if you have just a private key or just a public key, that's it. You have one private key and one corresponding public key or address. That's a single address system. That's how wallets used to be in the past. But modern wallets are based on what's known as hierarchical deterministic wallets, which is basically a tree of keys that is planted with a seed. You plant the seed and then you grow a tree. And the tree has branches, and those branches have smaller branches and smaller branches all the way down to leaves. and the leaves are your keys. The reason we use this tree structure is for two reasons, really. The first one is so that we don't reuse addresses. So when you notice that your wallet, which you started with some seed, produces a new address every time you try to do a transaction. When you receive Bitcoin, for example, it will give you a new address every time you receive an amount of Bitcoin. That's for your own privacy. It's able to do that, and it's able to manage all of these addresses because it has generated this tree, and you're picking addresses off a specific branch. The other thing that this tree structure gives us is the ability to designate different branches for different cryptocurrencies, as well as different branches for different accounts. So you can have a Bitcoin branch, an Ether branch, a Litecoin branch, etc., etc., etc. And most cryptocurrencies support this so that you can have a single seed that produces a tree of keys where you have branches for storing your Bitcoin, branches for storing your Litecoin, branches for storing your Ether. Under those branches, you have even smaller branches. So on your wallet, you may see your wallet say something like account 1, account 2, account 3. You can create sub-accounts just to organize things for your own purpose. So for example, I might have one account from my Bitcoin wallet that I use for personal, another account that I use for one company, another account that I use for another company, and that helps me with my own internal management and accounting. So if you were to see behind the scenes, these accounts are different branches. So I'm taking the tree, or my wallet is taking the tree that's produced by this seed, and off the main trunk it's finding the Bitcoin branch, and off the Bitcoin branch it's then naming the sub-branches as account 0, account 1, account 2, account 3, and you can keep going. So this is an organizational system. Now, a single key is a private key, and from that you get a public key. But if you take the root of the tree or the root of one of the branches, that's an extensible key, meaning that that key can give you the rest of the branch. The master extended private key or extensible private key is the trunk. From that you can generate all of the branches for the different cryptocurrencies and their sub-accounts. If you use that root, you can basically regenerate the entire tree. If you use a smaller branching point, for example, you take the xpub for the Bitcoin branch, then from that you can generate the Bitcoin sub-accounts and keys, but not the Ethereum sub-account keys or the Litecoin sub-accounts and keys, because those are on different branches. So when you have an xpriv or xpub, what you're doing is you're choosing the branching point. The master is at the root, and then you can go all the way down the branches as fine as you want, unlimited levels of branching. We really only use 3. All right, let me put this final point, which is really important. The basic difference between an xpriv and an xpub is that if you have an xpriv, that branch point, you can generate all the private keys on the branch. But here's a magic little trick. If you have the xpub, you can only generate the public keys on that branch, or the addresses, without having any of the private keys that allow you to sign for transactions. And this is extremely useful for doing 2 things. One is to create a watch-only wallet. So you can say, I want to take the xpub of the first sub-account of Bitcoin only, that branch up there, and generate only public keys. That's an xpub. That's a 3 levels down xpub. And it allows you to produce addresses for the Bitcoin sub-account. Now, you would put that on a shop, for example, or on a billing system where you want to create invoices. And that way, you don't have any private keys on the vulnerable website, shop, or invoice system. It can still generate addresses for all of your customers to pay you. That's how we do things like e-commerce servers, invoicing servers, let's say BTC Pay and things like that. And that also means that you can create a wallet that can see the balance that exists in that sub-account without being able to see the balance on any other account, by being able to generate all of the addresses that it belongs to. So that's what an xpub is, as simply as I can make it in this amount of time. We have a follow-up question. Let me see if I can find it. I don't know if it starred, and I don't see it. All right, let me do another follow-up question. Can you change a derivation path to anything, or does it have to follow the adopted formats? Will a wallet still function if you use an unusual derivation path? So how does this relate to xpubs and what we were talking about before? You remember we have a tree? Well, a derivation path is basically a map that allows you to pick a specific branch. So if you start from the root, which on a derivation path we call M, and then you have the first branch you take is 0, so we'd call that M/0. The first branch under that would also be 0, so that would be M/0/0. So that's a path. It tells you start with the master, go to the 0 branch, and from that one go to the 0 branch of that, and you can keep going down the 0 branch. Or you could say M2 17, 22, 0, and you've picked a different branch on this tree. So basically a derivation path is a path that goes up the tree and picks one of the branches at each level to find a specific sub-branch of the tree. And because wallets try to be compatible across each other, there are some standard derivation paths, meaning that we have some standards that say this is where the Bitcoin branch should be. This is where the sub-account number 2 of the Bitcoin branch should be. So any wallet can find that. Any wallet that's doing Ethereum, for example, will look on a specific branch number in order to find the Ethereum keys that are under there on any sub-accounts, and people can designate different branches for different purposes. Now, you can use any derivation path. You could go nuts. There are 2 billion branches under each branch, and you can easily get lost. If you pick the 17 millionth first level branch, followed by the 33,000th second level branch, followed by the 1.9 billionth third level branch, you can do that. Good luck finding your money afterwards, because if nobody knows that you've done that, it's actually impossible to find. If you think about it, each level you go down, 2 billion times 2 billion times 2 billion, 3 levels deep, you're screwed. You're looking at a brute forcing problem. So don't hide stuff on the tree, and don't use non-standard derivation paths. Not because you can't, but because you will get lost on a tree that has so many sub-branches that you can't find anything. All right. We've got another follow-up question that's relevant to this. Mandarin asks, if one private key is exposed, presumably from a branch, are others from that branch at risk? No. As long as the only thing that's exposed is a private key from that branch, the branching system uses what's called hardened derivation. You can't figure out any of the other branches or any of the other keys on that branch. In fact, there's no way to tell if you have a private key or an address, a public key. There's no way to tell if that's related to any other private key or address. From the blockchain perspective, they're just private keys and addresses. Who knows how they were generated? They're just numbers. And there's no way to find one from the other or to derive them unless you have the xpub or xprov. Unless you have the extensible part of the branch that allows you to generate the whole branch and everything under it infinitely deep. You can't generate adjacent branches, And if you have one key, you can't generate adjacent keys like the previous or next key on that branch, or the previous and next address on that branch if you only have one, which is a really important principle. All right, 340 bewildered people getting very confused about the technical depth we just dove into and wondering what the hell all of this arboreal, horticultural, tree trimming information has to do. They came here for the moon coins, and now I'm teaching them gardening. So trim your bonsai, people. All right, you want to get further confused with obscure topics? How much of a threat is quantum computing to the cryptography that secures Bitcoin? Is this easily planned against by upgrading the protocol? David, thank you for that question. I'll answer it in two parts. Quantum computing is a threat to any classical cryptography algorithm that is not quantum resistant. And of course, that also applies to pretty much all blockchains at the moment and pretty much all types of cryptography, but it also applies to things that are much more important and much more widely used in society. All of banking security, all of data security, all of cloud security, all of user authentication security depends on classic cryptographic algorithms. And when I say classical, I mean non-quantum, meaning that classical computers, non-quantum computers, use these algorithms. And these algorithms are susceptible to quantum cryptanalysis or full decryption on a trivial basis. So quantum computing isn't just a threat to Bitcoin. It's a threat to any form of cryptography that is not quantum resistant, which is almost all of them. But it only becomes a threat when you can marshal enough qubits. And there is no evidence that we're getting much closer to marshalling enough qubits to affect even the simplest cryptographic algorithms that are widely used and considered secure against classical computing attacks. In fact, if you look at the development of quantum computing, the progress is actually slowing down, not speeding up. It's almost like an inverse Moore's law. It's getting harder and harder to add qubits. Now, there may be breakthroughs, and there may be breakthroughs we don't know about that give certain agencies the ability to have quantum computers much more powerful than the ones we have in the public. That still doesn't make them a threat to systems that use, for example, key sizes in the order of 256 bits, as is used in Bitcoin's elliptic curve. Now, how do we fix this? At some point in the future, if quantum computing is asymmetrically available, meaning that some people have it but most people don't, then it may become a threat, certainly to all communications networks and information security across the board, but also to Bitcoin's cryptography. In that case, if there is an indication that this is likely or imminent or close, in order to fix that, you need to change the signature algorithm. And changing the signature algorithm is a relatively easy technical problem, and it is a relatively difficult logistical problem. And it's the kind of problem that in computer engineering, we try to not prematurely optimize, meaning that we don't solve problems that don't yet exist or need to exist in the next decade. Most people who are experts on this, and I'm not, would say that this threat is at least a decade away, and therefore it is not something that we need to imminently solve. Solving it, yeah, you introduce a new signature algorithm, and anybody who uses this new signature algorithm can have quantum resistance. Great, fantastic. Here's the problem. All of the coins that are stored under the old signature algorithm are vulnerable. And in order to make them not vulnerable, you need to move the funds, unlock them from ECDSA, and relock them under this new quantum resistant signature algorithm so that they cannot be easily swiped. Now, we already know that a whole bunch of Bitcoin has already been lost in terms of the keys being lost. And so how do we know when quantum computers are finally able to break the cryptography of ECDSA? I'll tell you how. We start seeing Bitcoin from 2009 moving. Bitcoin that hasn't moved because the keys are lost. Bitcoin that hasn't moved because the owners are dead. And the keys have been lost forever. And the reason that Bitcoin is moving is because a quantum computer doesn't need the private keys in order to unlock those transactions. So we are going to have a redistribution of Bitcoin at some point in the 10, 15, 20, 25 years from now, where old Bitcoin will be spendable by people who have quantum computers. And who knows? Maybe at that point, those funds will be frozen or not. Not a problem to solve yet. It's an interesting academic exercise. It's not actually a concern for anybody who's using Bitcoin today. One last point. A couple of blockchains are trying to make themselves quantum resistant. And again, I think that's a classic case of premature optimization. It's solving for a problem that doesn't exist instead of problems that do exist today, which are things like censorship resistance, robust decentralization, broad use and applicability, developer ecosystem and community. Those are problems we have today. Designing the user interface is a problem we have today. Quantum resistance, not a problem we have today or in the next decade. All right, we've got 15 minutes left. We're going to answer probably about 3, maybe 4 questions, depending on how quickly I answer them. Some of these questions have been pretty meaty, so I've been giving you long answers because I think you deserve long answers and complete answers. But let's see if we can make it a bit faster. And I'm going to try to pick some fun questions. Maybe you can give me some fun questions. I'm a bit worried about how you will interpret the word fun, but let's see. Gabriel asks, what do Schnorr Signatures and Taproot mean for the evolution of the BTC chain? You know, Schnorr Signatures and Taproot and TapScript, which are 3 technologies that are in the final stages of review, and the next big feature upgrade that is planned for Bitcoin, they really change the game in a lot of ways. Schnorr signatures specifically are what the signature algorithm should have been from the very beginning and would have been if it wasn't patent encumbered. Instead, Schnorr signatures were under patent at the time. Satoshi used ECDSA, elliptic curve digital signature algorithm, which was not patent encumbered, as a poor alternative. And Schnorr signatures are so much more powerful. Schnorr signatures can do some very interesting things, including signature aggregation, threshold signatures, and things like that. Basically, what you can do is you can add up keys and add up signatures with Schnorr in such a way that you can create what looks like a single key, single signature, but is actually produced by multiple signers signing simultaneously. You can also aggregate signature verification across multiple signatures. So these additive properties of Schnorr signatures open the door for some very, very interesting multi-signature constructs and some very interesting smart contract capabilities that actually make a bunch of different protocols, including things like Lightning, much, much more efficient. The other thing they do is they allow us to do various optimizations in the way signatures are stored in the blockchain, potentially storing only one aggregate signature for a bunch of transactions, or perhaps even one signature per block that signs all of the transactions, massively reducing the storage needs for a block and the verification needs for a block. So these are interesting things. Taproot and TapScript create a number of other really important optimizations. One is the ability to create trees of scripts. So you probably know that a Bitcoin transaction has a script that tells you who can unlock it, or not who, but how it can be unlocked. Now, at the moment, if you try to make a complex script, you have to present that entire script every time you try to unlock it, even if you're only using one part of the script. So let's say you create a script in Bitcoin that says, if A or B or C or D and E or F and G and H sign this, then it's unlocked. Oh, if you're only interested in doing the if A part, why are you providing all of the other scripts that you're never exercising? Not only are you producing a lot more size in your transaction because you're producing this massive script that has lots and lots of clauses, the kind of thing we use as a smart contract in Lightning channels, but also it breaks your privacy because now you know that it wasn't just one option like if A. Instead, it was a whole bunch of other options which have other keys in them, and you can see those. So that tells you a bit about how the script was constructed. Taproot and TapScript allow us to do this in a Merkle tree, where you only reveal the one clause you're exercising, and in a very efficient way using binary trees that allow you to summarize 1,000 conditions on a script using just 10 hashes in order to summarize that script. So that ability is very powerful. Finally, one of the features of Taproot is, or the feature of Taproot, is the ability to have a whole set of scripts in a tree, and one of the clause being the everyone agrees and applies a single aggregate signature that makes it look like this was a single payment to a single key. That has some enormous privacy considerations, because what that means is that the vast majority of complex scripts can be made to appear as a single payment to a single public key that was signed by a single user, even if underneath that was a very complex script, maybe a smart contract for a channel closure, and all of that detail is hidden completely. By making all transactions appear as a single public key payment, this massively increases what's known as the anonymity set. Basically, if you want to hide a needle, you don't hide it in a haystack, you hide it in a needle stack. And that's the concept behind Taproot. All right, give me just a second, and I will be right back. All right, let's get serious now. Enough technology. Tell me about TV series that I really enjoyed. Have you watched Mr. Robot? In it, the biggest corporation in the world fears Bitcoin. They work hard to keep people using Ecoin, their own controlled currency. Yes, I have. I loved that show. It was a wonderful show. And the thing I loved about it wasn't actually just the Bitcoin references and the criticism of the financial system and the banking system that was in it. One of the things that I really liked about this was the fact that every single scene where you see hacking by Elliot in Mr. Robot, or in fact by anyone in Mr. Robot, it's real. It's 100% real. For years now, every single sci-fi or hacking-related TV show or movie involves people typing really, really fast and moving cubes in a 3D animated virtual world that looks like an arcade game, and it's all bullshit. Every single hacking scene in Mr. Robot uses the exact same tools that information security professionals and hackers use in the exact way. These are real attacks, exactly as they would be done. that are realistic for the context of the attack. The commands are actual, real commands, and there are hundreds of Easter eggs hidden throughout. Every screenshot that you see, every time a screen appears or even a notebook appears in Mr. Robot, pause it. Read carefully. The code is real. QR codes in there lead you to Easter eggs on websites that are hidden with HTML code inside and things like that. It is full of Easter eggs for those of you geeky enough to go digging. I spent hours chasing those Easter eggs, and it doubled my enjoyment of this show. So if you haven't seen it, get to see it. And no, that wasn't really a Bitcoin answer to a Bitcoin question, but good enough. Anonymous asks, I was a victim of a scam using Bitcoin. I know Bitcoin transactions are traceable, but is there a way to get more information about the scammers? Not really. Not if they're any good. There are some possibilities to get information about the scammers by having some exchanges block their transactions. But really, that only happens when we're talking about very large amounts. And it isn't a successful technique. Some exchanges will block them, others won't. And you only need one not to block them, and it's gone. It's gone. In fact, not only do we see these scams all the time, and I'm really sorry this happened to you. I'm really sorry that your Bitcoin was stolen. I see these scams all the time. People contact me and they say, hey, I got scammed, I lost some money, can you help me? And unfortunately, the answer is almost always no. I can't help you. No one can help you. If you hand someone Bitcoin, it's like giving them a suitcase full of cash, and once they leave, there's no way to recover it. There's no way to stop them from spending it. There's no way to stop them from moving it to other addresses. That is the whole purpose of a censorship-resistant, decentralized system like Bitcoin. Now, there may be some future technologies that help us alleviate some of these problems. These future technologies are things called covenants and vaults, which allow us to put constraints within the Bitcoin script. For example, to revoke payments under certain conditions, to impose delays or escrow conditions, or to limit which addresses Bitcoin can be transferred to, essentially creating whitelists within our own Bitcoin that prevents that Bitcoin from being sent to addresses we didn't approve. These are protocol level changes that have not been implemented, that might be implemented in the future. They might be made more easy to implement by some of the developments that were introduced by SegWit, which allows script upgrades. But the bottom line is, right now, if you lose control of your Bitcoin, if you give your seed or your keys to other people, they can take it. And once they take it, you can't get it back. In fact, not only are we seeing a lot of these scams, we're now seeing second-order scams. This is where people tell you that they can use a special trick to get your Bitcoin back. All they want is a small deposit in Bitcoin in order to help you recover your original funds. And they'll show you all kinds of happy customers who have had their funds recovered by this incredible detective service. It's another scam. And what they're going to do is steal from you again, leveraging the fact that your initial mistake was based on a lack of knowledge. And in the despair to fix that mistake, even though lots of people will tell you it cannot be fixed, you end up getting scammed again. So not only can you not recover your Bitcoin, but the very people who are telling you you can are lying to you and will steal from you again because you have proven to them that, unfortunately, you can be scammed. It's a very lucrative second-order scam. I've had half-an-hour conversations where I'm DMing furiously back and forth with someone, and I'm telling them, no, you're getting scammed again. No, they can't help you. And they're like, but they said they can help me. And they, you know, sometimes I'm impersonated by people who offer to help others recover their Bitcoin and then steal even more money. You can't. You have to accept it. There's only one thing you can take away from this situation, and that is a lesson. You can learn how not to get scammed, at least how not to get scammed that way again, and become much more skeptical and critical of information you find online about these kinds of things. People are asking for a rabbit hole. I don't think I have a rabbit hole for you today. I haven't thought of a question that I wanted to ask myself. So we're not going to do a rabbit hole. I'm really sorry. I'm just going to maybe answer a couple more. Cryptos Chain asks, can you please give us your opinion on the new technology beast called Polkadot, which has gained a huge community in a short period of time after launch? Thanks. I'll be very honest with you, and this happens a lot. I get asked by people online all the time, what is your opinion about this? What is your opinion about that? What is your opinion about something else? In the vast majority of cases, I don't have an informed opinion. And the reason I don't have an informed opinion is because developing an informed opinion requires enough research, understanding, and technical depth for me to express an informed opinion. That takes a lot of time. And I don't have that time. I'm stretched really, really thin. I'm working on Bitcoin, I'm working on Ethereum, I'm working on Lightning Network, I'm working on a bunch of privacy coins, I'm interested in a variety of topics, but the amount of knowledge and the amount of reading I need to do just to keep up with the narrow spectrum of technologies I have is already a full-time plus job. So I don't have informed opinions on 90% of the stuff that's out there. Here's what I do know about Polkadot. It was created by Gav Wood. If you can see my book, Mastering Ethereum here, the co-author on that book, my co-author, was Gavin Wood. He created Polkadot. What I do know about Polkadot is that it is a blockchain of blockchains. I'll put it that way. That's probably wrong. But the bottom line is it's a layer for connecting blockchains together. And for expressing blockchains as components of a bigger system. That's my understanding of it. So it's a multi-ledger technology, if you like. That's a common term that's used for these types of technologies. Some people have compared it to things like Cosmos. I don't know if that's true or not. I don't know if it's in any way comparable. I know that Gav has been researching this and building this since before we started writing Mastering Ethereum. So a lot of work has gone into it, but I don't know if it's good. I don't know if it's bad. I don't know if it's interesting. I don't know if it isn't. I don't know. And when I don't have an informed opinion, I have no opinion. That's the bottom line. And you're going to hear that from me all the time on Twitter where people ask, what about X? What about Y? And the answer is, sorry, I don't have an informed opinion. By the way, if I say I don't have an informed opinion, please do not answer back by sending me 27 links to read. The reason I don't have an informed opinion is because I don't have the time to expand my knowledge on every topic that exists in this industry. We are no longer operating in an industry where someone can be a blockchain expert. That doesn't even make any sense anymore. Because the space has diversified so broadly, the amount of research that's happening in multiple different directions has expanded so much that we are increasingly in a space where we have to specialize in order to have informed opinions that matter. So, jack of all trades, master of none? No thanks, not for me. One more. Becker asks, I have many mnemonics flying around. It is hard to keep up with all my private keys because I'd like to try out wallets. What are good practices to tackle all? Becker, I would use one mnemonic for trying out new wallets, just one, and use it on multiple wallets. One that only has small amounts. And you'll end up putting amounts on many different branches of the tree derived from that mnemonic or seed, as you may have heard it called. By reusing one, you recognize that this will not be a cold wallet. It's a hot wallet. And you shouldn't put a lot of money on it because one of these wallets may be crap and may steal everything it can find on this tree. So you should be ready to lose your money. I wouldn't put more than, I don't know, $20, $30, $40 on it. Depending on your financial situation, that might be too much. And then I would reuse that same mnemonic for all my tests. In fact, that's what I do. I have one which is like a petty cash test things mnemonic phrase that I've used so many times, I almost have it memorized. And it's a 12-word phrase. It doesn't need to be a 24-word phrase. Many wallets don't do 24 words. They only do 12. And that's the most portable size you can have across many different wallets. Use one for all of them. And if you already have too many, consolidate. Figure out which one is the coldest, most secure one you have. And if you don't have one already, generate a new one. Back it up well. And do long-term cold storage on that. Use one for your operational expenses, your business checking account, your personal checking account, the place where you do transactions, where you keep a slightly larger amount than your back pocket, but not as much that you would not want it in cold storage. An intermediate, warm wallet, which I put on a hardware wallet for daily operational use, and then have a hot, I don't care what happens to it, throwaway wallet, and if I lose it, it's okay, and I'm not going to cry wallet that you use for all of your tests. You can back that up very, very simply. I actually back mine up in my password manager. Only that one, just because it has always less than $100 in it, and I've used it on dozens and dozens of wallets in different currencies to run tests and experiment with new things without having to generate a new mnemonic for each one. I hope this helps. And then here's the other problem. You can never throw away any of the ones you had before. And the reason you can never throw away all of the ones you had before is because you may have forgotten that there's a tiny amount of X on one of the branches. And who knows, that tiny amount of X on one of the branches may be worth hundreds of thousands of dollars 10 years from now. And you will be kicking yourself up and down creation if you have thrown that away thinking it was empty. So keep all of the ones you have now. Find the one that you think is emptiest and designate that your test mnemonic, and keep only that one and use it for all of your tests. Figure out how to do cold storage. Figure out how to do intermediate warm storage with a hardware wallet for your operational expenses. And stop creating more mnemonics, Becker. You can't have this many. It's going to drive you crazy. All right. Thank you so much for joining me. A few last words, some logistics for the following weeks, and another thank you to all of the people who support me in this work and make it possible, not just for me, but more importantly, for my team to continue doing this. In the middle of a pandemic and a recession, I have continued to grow my team. I try to up my game with every production we do. I'm building new things, which I'll be very excited to announce in the next couple of months, including some excellent new educational resources. And I continue steadfastly to work on educating everyone in the world about Bitcoin and open blockchains in as many languages as possible. Last week, I had a special premiere, which was how I set up this studio, which looks pretty good as you see it right now. And you should see how gnarly it looks from all of the other angles behind the scenes and the process of turning what was a grandma's bedroom in an Airbnb into a full-time production video studio that I can pack up in one suitcase and move whenever I need. It's a pretty fun video. I hope you enjoy it. You can find that on my YouTube channel. Next week is a family break. I have some family obligations. I'm not going to be live streaming next week. We will be posting some videos as part of our regular schedule. You can find those. If you want to be notified of new videos that are coming out, subscribe on the YouTube channel and hit that little bell icon so you can get notifications every time we publish a video. On September 12th, we're doing a bonus live stream about decentralized identity. You picked this. I sent out a poll to both my Patreon community builders as well as my YouTube members, and we got hundreds of responses. Actually, that's wrong. On YouTube, we got thousands of responses, and the top answer was either decentralized identity or Ethereum 2.0. And guess what? We're doing both. September 12th, decentralized identity. September 19th, Ethereum 2.0. I don't just thank you for your donations. I thank you for being the people I can rely on to give me great ideas, to bounce ideas off, to help me troubleshoot, figure out, and plan everything that we do. This is all about you. Thank you so much. And now, just before we go, another short video to thank my patrons. And as soon as I'm back from that, I'm going to answer one more question on the Q&A. And that way, you can't leave. All of my patrons are the bee's knees. Thank you. Special thanks to 55 patrons. Yes to Crypto, WD, Vladislav Kumas, V45370, Tripluka, Thomas Dreyer, Sven Sommer, Sujay, Sui, Spectre 135, David Hardridge, David Fryer, CyberRoot64, Crypto Chrissy, Charlie J, Chata Lang, Carlos M, Burst Up Briz, and there's more coming. I'm going to have to wait for this slideshow to roll again back to the previous one so I can continue. Spectre 135, Somebody, Seth Troxa, Santiago Gonzalez Tarl, Robin K, Richard Taylor, Romenko Duma, Rafael Kislak, Quicks, Briz, Antonio Luna, Agustin Labaroni, Adriana the Bitcoin Minimalist, Al Dave, Mr. Wellman, Make Void, and let's wait again. There are 55 patrons and they are the bee's knees. That's a bee, it has knees. Pukatrera, Outlier Canada, Neverland, Niraj Badaya, Mimble, Mike Ferrer, Marcy S, Karen and Joy Shihara, John Pathfinder, Make Void, Francesco Canessa, and to everyone who supports this work every single month. One of my patrons asks me to remind you something, which I'm not going to see until we do one more round. Did you notice the bee? It has knees. Eccentric Biped, David Stansel, Frank M, and Bitcoin is the money of the people, for the people, by the people. Thank you so much for listening to this. A message from my patrons now, and then we'll be back with the last question of the day.
I am a patron of Andreas because I came across his videos online, and that's how I learned about Bitcoin. So that's how I got introduced to Bitcoin.
I'm out tonight at a social event organised by Andreas as part of his Patreon support. We just had a few drinks in a pub, which is a Punch Tavern, downtown London. So it's been a really fun evening to meet a lot of like-minded people.
We should support the work Andreas is doing. He's doing so much in getting new people into Bitcoin and into Bitcoin education.
He's a great teacher. He can explain very complex topics in an easy to understand way. He's very honest, very precise, technically prepared, and intellectually honest. I think is his best characteristic.
Brings such clarity to really complex subjects, which is Bitcoin, and the industry around it.
He has been a very, very good inspiration for me, and every Bitcoin I'm giving to him, it will be very well used in helping others understand Bitcoin, and I think it will improve the world at some point.
Being a patron, I get to meet Andreas, and that's why I love being a patron. I'm going to continue being a patron.
I think it's just a good thing. If you're interested in learning new things and also want to support the Bitcoin community, then you got to be a patron.
Being a Patreon makes you feel special. You can attend to his live Q&A sessions. You can meet him at happy hours. It's really great, totally worth it. I'm very, very enthusiastic of being a Patreon.
I'd like him to be able to produce his great and valuable content in the future free from advertising and just with the help of his patrons, and that's why I'm supporting him on Patreon.
All right, and our last question of the day. Simon asks, personally, I like paper wallets and I think is a good way of gifting. Think, for example, in the event of a wedding present. Would you recommend an alternative? paper wallets are mostly obsolete technology, and I generally recommend against them for long-term storage or use because they are dangerous. But for smaller amounts, if you want to make a gift, they're okay. The problem is that people are likely to lose them, throw them away, or have them destroyed by moisture, fire, or other things like that. And also, a lot of people don't understand the long-term possibility of value here, and they neglect to protect these things. So, I don't know. You can do this in a number of different ways. A paper wallet is one possibility. Another form factor that I really, really like is the OpenDime. OpenDime is a project that produces these little USB keys. They're basically just like a USB flash drive, and in fact they work the same. But on this device is a locally generated private key and public key. It's basically a silicon paper wallet where you can see the public key, the address, when you plug it in as a flash drive. It opens up a browser that allows you to see the Bitcoin address and see how much money there is in there. And you can pass it from person to person, and they can be guaranteed that the amount has not been spent, because in order to spend it, you have to physically damage the circuit in a way that breaks the seal and reveals the private key. I really like these. They're a really cool way of doing it. So I've actually gifted OpenDimes to a bunch of people. By the way, I have no sponsorship arrangement, no endorsement, and I'm not saying this is a secure or otherwise project or anything like that, although they've proven to be okay so far. All I'm saying is I enjoy using that product. I have used it for exactly this purpose, which is gifting to people. Something about the format of a USB key makes it a bit more robust, in my opinion, than a paper wallet, a bit more likely for people to associate it with something they need to carefully protect and store and maintain. But again, anytime I gift Bitcoin to someone, I assume they're going to lose it. So make sure you gift only amounts that you're okay if they neglect to protect the amount and end up losing it, because otherwise you're going to be upset when you find out 10 years later that they threw away, thousands of dollars perhaps of a gift that you gave them at a time when it was valuable. There's a follow-up question on that, which is people are worried about the long-term viability of a USB flash drive versus paper. Yeah, paper, under the best circumstances, is actually more long-term viable than a USB key. Now, keep in mind, this is not your typical USB key. This is not just a generic low-quality flash drive. It's designed specifically for this purpose. And I would say the biggest problem with both a paper key and a USB OpenDime style transferable Bitcoin is neglect by the new owners, because they don't understand what you just gave them, and they will lose, shred, melt, wet, or burn accidentally their paper wallet just as easily as they're going to crush and destroy their USB key. This isn't going to last years and years and years. This isn't going to last decades. If you wanted something that lasts decades, yeah, a paper wallet is better. But the likelihood is they're going to forget it or lose it much sooner than that. So if you just want to give them something that they keep for a few years, maybe up to 5 years, there's really not much difference between the two. You can do it that way. But you can also just do a paper wallet. It's up to you. All right. Thank you so much for coming on this weekend of our pandemic. Last week I did a studio setup. Check that out on my YouTube channel. Next week is a family break. The week after that, on Saturday, right here, same time, Decentralized Identity, September 12th. September 19th, ETH 2.0. These are both going to be live stream Q&As where you can ask questions about the specific topics only, Decentralized Identity or ETH 2.0. If you're a patron, you're going to get the links to start asking questions now. If you're a YouTube member, you're going to get the links a few days before or a few hours before the live stream starts to get a head start on everybody else. And everybody else, jump in and ask them live. See you soon. Take care of yourself. Be safe. The world may feel like it's falling apart, but here today, just for this brief moment in time, we all had fun, right? And we hung out together and we talked about the things that we care about. And that's all that matters. Thank you so much for being with me for this.